The music didn't stop because the orchestra had reached the end of the waltz. It stopped because Victor Hale had just slapped me across the face in front of 300 people. My cheek burned. Somewhere to my left, a woman dropped her champagne glass, and nobody bent to pick it up. Then I saw him in the doorway of the ballroom, still in his black overcoat, November rain dark on his shoulders. Matteo. My husband. The man I had agreed to leave at midnight. He crossed the floor without hurry, and the crowd parted for him the way water parts for a ship. He stopped in front of me, studied the mark blooming on my cheek, and asked, very quietly, "Why didn't you call me?" I laughed, and it came out broken. "Call you? Matteo, you're the reason I'm leaving." For a second, nobody in that ballroom breathed. I watched my words hit him harder than Victor's hand had hit me. His jaw tightened, not with anger at me, but with something worse. Recognition, like a man hearing the verdict read at his own trial. Before I tell you what he did next, tell me honestly in the comments. If you were me, standing there with a stranger's handprint still burning on your face, would you have forgiven him for that question, or would you still have walked out? I've had 2 years to think about it, and I'm still not sure. Let me take you back 4 minutes, because the slap had a beginning. Victor had cornered me by the terrace windows, smiling, and said, "Everyone in this room knows you're finished, darling." The wife in name only. Honestly, I'm doing him a favor. I looked at him and said, "You have confused me with someone you can frighten." That's when his hand moved. Matteo didn't argue with me. That was almost worse. He stepped between me and Victor and said, "Do you want to leave, or do you want to stay? Your choice." Not his. Not mine. It was the first time in months he had offered me a choice instead of a decision, and I hated how much it moved me. Behind him, Victor was already composing his face into regret. "Matteo, old friend, your wife has a tongue on her. She insulted my late wife's memory, and I lost my temper. These things happen at parties." He said it the way men say lines they have rehearsed in the mirror. Matteo didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on me, waiting for my answer. And that was when I noticed something I would think about for weeks afterward. Victor wasn't afraid. A man who had just struck Matteo Varenza's wife in public should have been terrified. Instead, he looked almost satisfied, like a chess player who has just traded a pawn for something nobody else at the board can see yet. I was too humiliated to understand that look. Later, I would understand everything about it. "I want to stay," I said, because I had spent 2 years being managed, and I would not give 300 strangers the pleasure of watching me run. It was the hardest word I had said in months. Matteo nodded once, as if I had passed a test I didn't know I was taking. He turned to Victor. "We'll discuss this another time," he said in the soft voice that made powerful men check their exits. "Enjoy the rest of the ball, Victor. It's the last one you'll attend in this city." Then the orchestra wisely began to play. He walked me toward the terrace with his hand at my back, not quite touching me, a 1/4 inch of air between us. That was our whole marriage by then. 2 people moving through the world together with a 1/4 inch of air between them, each of us pretending the distance was the other's idea. You should know that I didn't marry a stranger. I married Matteo Varenza when I was 29, in a small ceremony above the sea on the Amalfi coast. And for the first year I was happy in a way that frightened me. He ran the legitimate half of an old family empire, hotels and shipping, and carried the other half's reputation like a weapon he never drew. People called him a mafia boss. He called himself a businessman with difficult relatives. Both were true. His Aunt Celeste had raised him after his parents died, and his cousin Julian ran the port contracts, and between them they had opinions about everything that bore the Varenza name. Especially about me. I should explain who Victor Hale was, because it matters. He ran a logistics company that lived off Varenza port contracts, and he owed money in every direction a man can owe it, including directions that don't send invoices. He was charming the way a lit match is charming, and for 15 years Celeste had treated him like a favorite hunting dog. The trouble began so gently that I didn't recognize it as trouble. A message Matteo sent that I never received. A dinner where I waited 2 hours because someone had told him I already ate and went to bed. Small things. The kind you forgive, the kind you don't even mention, until they're all you have left. Then came the recording. It arrived on my phone one night from a number I didn't know. Matteo's voice, cold as marble, saying, "Keep her out of the real business. She doesn't need to know. It's a marriage on paper. It stays that way. I listened to it 11 times. And then I stopped listening, because by then I believed it. What I didn't know was that the words had been cut from a conversation about a hotel merger and stitched together by someone who knew exactly where to place the knife. All I knew was my husband's voice, and the sound of it ending us. I never confronted him. That is my shame, and I'll own it. I grew up watching my mother beg my father for explanations he enjoyed withholding, and I swore I would never beg any man for clarity. So I went quiet instead, and Mateo read my silence the way his family had trained him to, as regret. Because while I was hearing that recording, Mateo was being shown photographs. Me leaving a lawyer's office on Via Condotti, looking furtive. Me at lunch with a journalist who covered organized crime. Me, apparently, selling pieces of his life to whoever was buying. He never showed them to me. He just stopped reaching for my hand. The lawyer was a college friend drafting my grandmother's will. The journalist was her brother, and we were planning her wedding. But nobody asked me, and photographs don't come with context. They came instead, with Celeste's soft voice in Mateo's ear saying, "I hate to be right about her, Caro. I truly do." So we performed our marriage for another year like actors who had forgotten the plot. Separate bedrooms. Civil breakfasts. And finally, 3 weeks before the Aurelia Foundation ball, one calm conversation over cold coffee. We would separate quietly after one final appearance as husband and wife. Papers drawn, no scandal, dignity intact. Which brings me back to the terrace, my cheek on fire. My almost ex-husband a quarter-inch away, asking why I hadn't called him. "You want the truth?" I said. "In 2 years, you never once asked where I was going or what I was doing. I stopped expecting you to care. It hurt less than hoping." He went very still. "I asked every day," he said. "Your schedule always came back empty. Celeste told me you wanted your privacy respected. She said you told her yourself that I exhausted you." He stopped, and I watched him arrive at the edge of a thought and refused to step over it. "I never said that," I whispered. "I never said anything like it." The orchestra swelled. 300 people were pretending not to watch us. And Matteo Varenza, who did not have conversations that mattered in front of an audience, said, "Tomorrow, you and I are going to compare calendars, all of them. From the beginning." I almost said no. The papers were already waiting for our signatures, and comparing calendars felt 18 months too late. But Victor Hale had put his hand on my face with total confidence that nothing would come of it, and I wanted to know where a man got confidence like that. "Tomorrow," I agreed. I didn't say yes to saving our marriage that night. I said yes to comparing calendars, which felt like a much smaller thing to lose. Smaller risks are easier to forgive yourself for. And that single word is the entire reason I'm able to tell you this story. We drove home in silence, in separate cars, the way we had arrived. At the house, we stopped in the hallway between our 2 doors. And for a moment neither of us moved. "Tomorrow," he said again quietly, like a man confirming an appointment with his own executioner. Then his door closed, and mine closed, and the house swallowed the sound of both. Celeste called me the next morning, before Mateo and I had spoken a single word. "Darling, I heard there was an incident," she said, in a voice dipped in honey. These public scenes are so hard on Mateo's position. Perhaps it's kinder for everyone, if you let him go cleanly. She had heard about the slap before the newspapers had. She had heard about it before my cheek had stopped burning. The mark had settled overnight into a bruise the color of a coming storm. I found Mateo in his study with 2 phones and a pot of coffee, looking like a man who hadn't slept, which was remarkable, because Mateo slept like a soldier. Anywhere, on command. I studied my reflection in the hallway mirror first and made a decision. No powder, no hiding. If the city wanted to talk, it could talk about the truth. He didn't suggest a doctor, or a statement, or one of the 12 ways his world had of making inconvenient things disappear. He asked, "What do you want to do about Victor?" Not what he would do, what I wanted. In 2 years of marriage, I almost couldn't remember the last time he'd asked me that. "Nothing public," I said. "Not yet. If I run crying to the press, I'm the hysterical wife, and he knows it. He wanted a scene last night. I want to know why." Mateo looked at me for a long moment, and something shifted behind his eyes, like light moving when a door opens in a dark house. My aunt thinks you're unstable, he said carefully. She suggested it 4 times in 6 months. Emotional, unreliable, a liability at public events. He turned his cup in its saucer. And last night, Victor manufactured exactly that scene. In public, 3 weeks before we were due to quietly separate. I felt the pieces moving before I could see the picture. We told no one about the separation, I said. Only our lawyers. Mateo raised his eyes to mine. And Celeste, he said. I told her 2 weeks ago. I thought she deserved to hear it from me. He didn't accuse his aunt out loud, but I watched him pick up the second phone and make 3 calls, each shorter than the last, and I understood that whatever came next had already begun. Mateo investigating something was like weather moving in. You didn't see it. You felt the pressure change. I had seen that pressure save a shipping contract once. Now I wondered what it was about to find. While he made his calls, I made one of my own, to Elena Marsh, the Foundation's events coordinator, who had been standing 6 feet away the night before. You never raised your voice, she told me. Mr. Hale did all the talking, and Arya, his hands were shaking before he ever touched you. Like he was working up to it. Working up to it. I wrote the phrase down and underlined it twice. Men like Victor Hale didn't need to work up to cruelty. It came to them naturally. Unless the cruelty was an assignment, and he was more afraid of failing whoever gave it than he was of my husband. That afternoon, the courier delivered the separation papers, 60 pages of our failure in a cream folder. Mateo put them in his desk drawer without opening them. Not today, he said, and left the room. And I stood there in his study, wondering when the words "not today" had started sounding so much like hope. By Monday, the city had its version of the ball. In that version, I had provoked a grieving widower, and my husband had been too embarrassed to defend me. The story was everywhere at once, fully formed, like it had been written in advance. I remember reading it and thinking, this isn't gossip. Gossip grows. This was planted. I saved every article that morning. Evidence was becoming a habit. 2 days later, we sat at opposite ends of the long dining table with 18 months of our lives spread between us. Calendars, phone logs, invitations, driver's schedules. It looked like a war room. I suppose it was one. We had simply never known which war we were fighting. The pattern emerged within the first hour, the night of the Bellini auction. His calendar said I had declined to attend. My phone said I was never asked. The weekend at Lake Como. He was told I preferred the city. I had packed a bag and waited until 9 for a car that Celeste's driver had quietly canceled. Page after page, every cold breakfast, an empty evening had a small, reasonable lie underneath it, and every lie was sourced from the same direction: his aunt's office, his cousin's staff. The people who had raised him. The people whose word he had never once thought to check against mine. Then Mateo opened the drawer and took out the photographs. I never asked you about these, he said, laying them down one by one like cards in a losing hand. I want you to know that. I just believed them. Somehow that was easier than asking my wife why she wanted to leave me. So I told him. The lawyer was Sophia, my oldest friend, drafting my grandmother's will. The journalist was her brother Marco, and the lunch was about his wedding, and the only thing I had ever sold him was a recommendation for a florist. I watched the photographs rearrange themselves into innocence in front of Mateo's eyes. I have never seen a man look that tired, not angry at me either, which I had braced myself for. Just tired. The way you are tired when a load you've carried for years turns out to have been placed on your back by your own family, and you can finally set it down. Then it was my turn. I played him the recording, 11 months old, and watched him listen to his own voice ending our marriage. He made me play it 3 times. On the 3rd, he closed his eyes. The Bellagio acquisition, he said hoarsely. I said, it's a merger on paper. Somebody cut out the word merger and handed you a knife. Who was in the room? I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. It had been a family meeting about the acquisition. 4 people present, and 2 of them shared his last name. One of them had raised him. The other one wanted his chair. You can do that math as fast as I did. I want to pause here and say something about Mateo, because it is the thing I misunderstood the longest. He was not a cold man. He was a man raised by people who treated affection as a ledger. Every kindness recorded, every debt collected. Celeste had taught him that an open door is a door someone can lock behind you, so he kept his doors few and guarded, and I had mistaken the guard for the man. That evening, he asked me a question he should have asked 2 years earlier. The Ferrante rumor, spring before last. Someone fed the board a story that I was under investigation by the financial police. It died in a day, and nobody ever explained to me how it died. Do you know anything about that? I did. A stringer for a financial paper had called the house phishing. He had one digit wrong in a company registration number, and I heard the error and knew the whole story was built on it. I spent 6 hours documenting the mistake and sent the file to his editor. Not as Matteo's wife, as an art conservator who checked provenances for a living and hated watching a bad attribution stand. The story never ran. I never told Matteo, because he had seemed so distant that telling him felt like asking for credit, and I would sooner have died than ask that man for credit. It was me, I said quietly. I killed the story. He stared at me across the table. Celeste told me you refused to help, he said. She said you laughed about it. The port contract, he said next, and his voice had changed. Last October, Daniel flagged a customs manifest with altered tonnage. He told me the warning came through the house. I assumed it was Julian's people being useful for once. I closed my eyes. It was me. I was restoring a painting in Daniel's office, and the tonnage didn't match the insurance filing. I asked him not to mention my name. Why not? He asked. Why would you hide that? Because the last time I brought you something useful, Celeste told me the family business wasn't a place for wives with hobbies, and you said nothing. He flinched, and I knew he remembered it, and I was glad he flinched. Some things should hurt. Matteo stood up and walked to the window. The rain had started again, streaking the city lights down the glass. I let him stand there with his back to me for as long as he needed. Some men have to be alone with the size of what they've been wrong about. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Why didn't you ever tell me any of it? Any single piece? And there it was, the whole sad architecture of us in one question. Because every time I reached for you, there was a wall where you used to be, I said. I spent 2 years protecting a man who thought I was trying to destroy him. Telling him things requires believing he wants to hear them. He didn't answer that, because there was no answer. But before I tell you what he did next, I want your theory in the comments. Who do you think was lying to us, me, Matteo, or someone inside his own family? Drop your guess now, because the truth is stranger than any of you are predicting. What he did next was sit back down and tell me the truth about his side. He had been quietly investigating his own family for 8 months. Transfers out of the port accounts that didn't reconcile, decisions issued in his name that he never authorized, signatures on contracts that were almost, but not quite, his own. There was a name at the bottom of it. Sereno Logistics, a shell company that had collected 11 million euros in consulting fees from the Port Authority across 3 years. The registration documents were signed by a notary in Naples whose other most frequent client was a holding company Julian's wife had inherited. Matteo had followed the money for 8 months and kept hitting walls built by people he loved. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, and heard my own question handed back to me. Because the last time I trusted someone with an open investigation, my witness ended up on a container ship to nowhere with a new name, he said. And because pushing you away felt like the one thing guaranteed to get you out of the blast radius, I thought losing you was the price of you staying alive. I want to tell you I forgave him on the spot. I didn't. You don't unring 2 years of loneliness in one evening, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise, not even to myself. But I understood him for the first time. And understanding is the crack in the wall that the light gets through. We laid everything on the table, his evidence and mine, and looked for the seams. It didn't take long. The recording of his voice had been captured in his private study, a room exactly 5 people could enter. The photograph of me at Sophia's office noted an appointment time that existed in exactly one place. Matteo's personal diary, kept by his aunt's secretary of 30 years. Whoever had built our divorce held keys to every locked room in our lives, and they hadn't just unlocked the rooms. They had rearranged the furniture inside them and waited patiently for us to trip over it in the dark. That thought should have comforted me. It terrified me instead. Then Matteo said the thing that finally showed me the whole shape of our enemy. Look at what they took, he said. Not money. Well, some money. But look at the main effort. They never made a move on my title, my seat, my signature. Everything they did was aimed at the space between you and me. Because together we were the threat, I said slowly. You hold the authority, and I have the one skill this family has quietly feared for 40 years. He looked up. What skill is that? I met his eyes. I check provenances for a living, Mateo. I spot forgeries. And your port accounts are a forgery. I recognized your aunt's bookkeeping the way I recognize a painter's hand. Over the next days, the house began to talk. The driver who canceled the Como car said the instruction had come from Celeste's secretary. The housekeeper admitted she'd been asked to report my comings and goings, and was told it was for my own security. None of them believed they were doing harm. That's how these machines work. Each person turns one small, innocent-looking screw. He was quiet for a moment, and then he did something he had never done in 2 years of marriage. He asked me for help. Work with me, he said, not behind me, not protected on the sidelines, beside me. I need someone who can read a lie on paper. And I need to be able to trust the person reading it, and you are the only name on both lists. I agreed. On one condition, and I said it before he could finish smiling. This time, you don't protect me by keeping me in the dark. No secrets, no managing me, no deciding what I can handle. If we're doing this, I'm a partner, not a package you insure. He held out his hand across the table, and after a moment, I took it. I won't pretend we healed that week. Trust doesn't return like a tide. It returns like daylight, a few minutes earlier each morning, so gradually you can't say when it happened. We had breakfast in the same room. He told me where he was going, and I told him where I'd been. Small things. The kind you don't even mention, until they're all you have. Some nights we worked until 2 a.m. Some nights we didn't work at all. Our first dinner as partners was terrible. We burned the pasta. Matteo Varenza, who commanded hundreds of men, could not time spaghetti. We ate it anyway, standing at the kitchen counter, and he told me about the merger he was afraid of losing, and I told him about the Caravaggio attribution I was afraid of winning. It was the most ordinary evening of my life. I went to bed feeling like something broken in me had been set, like a bone. Celeste came to the house that Sunday, as she had every Sunday for 20 years. She brought pastries and grief in equal measure. Matteo looks exhausted, darling, she told me, patting my hand. This unpleasantness with Victor. A quieter wife would have spared him that. I smiled and poured her tea, and for the first time I watched her the way I watch a canvas. Not the surface, but the cracks underneath. What I saw, now that I was looking. She never asked about my face. 300 people had watched Victor Hale strike me. The whole city was talking about it, and my husband's aunt sat in my drawing room for an hour, and never once asked how I was. People who already know how a wound got there rarely ask after it. We had been working together for 6 weeks when they noticed. Of course they noticed. People who have spent 2 years conducting a marriage like an orchestra know instantly when the musicians start playing a different piece. Matteo laughed at something I said at a family dinner, a real laugh. And I watched Celeste's eyes flick to Julian across the table, the way you glance at a partner when the cards turn. Those 6 weeks were good work, and I want you to know that. Mornings over documents, Daniel teaching me the port ledgers line by line. I found my first true irregularity on a Tuesday. Dredging invoices signed by a harbor captain who had been dead 4 months. I remember Matteo's face when I showed him. Not surprise. Grief. It is one thing to suspect your family. It is another to watch your wife prove it. 10 days later, the second trap arrived. Matteo's security chief found a phone taped beneath the drawer of my conservation studio, a cheap model containing exactly 1 thread of messages. Me, apparently, negotiating port access schedules with a man named Raffaele Greco of the Marchetti Alliance, a business group the family had feuded with for 30 years. With the phone came a bank record. 200,000 euros, wired to an account in my maiden name at a private bank in Lugano, and emails, printed, weeks of them, in a voice that sounded almost like mine. Almost. It was a better forgery than the photographs. It was nearly good enough. Here is the moment everything turned. 8 months earlier, Matteo would have looked at that evidence and believed it, because believing it cost him nothing he hadn't already lost. Instead, he brought it to me. He laid the phone and the wire record and the emails on our kitchen table like a man laying down weapons, and he said, "Show me yours. Show me everything. The last time someone showed me proof against you, I believed it. I will not make that mistake twice." It took me 4 hours. The emails were the weak seam. Whoever wrote them had studied me, but they had studied my professional correspondence, and they made the mistake a forger always makes. They were too consistent. Every message opened the same way, same greeting, same rhythm. Real people are sloppier than forgeries. Real people get tired and careless. The forger never did. But the true fingerprint was smaller. In 3 separate emails, a meeting address was written as Via Appia Nuovo. Any Roman knows the street is Via Appia Nuova, feminine, like the road itself. And I had seen that exact error before. On the doctored schedule Celeste's office had sent Matteo the previous spring, listing my lunch with Marco, same street. Same mistake. Same invisible hand. The forger had a tell, and tells are how provenance people eat. Matteo's people found the second fingerprint in an hour. The printed emails had been generated from a file, created on software licensed to a consulting firm in Naples, the same firm that had billed the Port Authority for Sereno Logistics advisory work. The money that bought my frame-up had come out of the same pocket as the money they were stealing. We could have gone to the family then. We didn't. A trap you expose is a lesson. A trap you turn is a weapon. So we let it keep working. I kept going to my studio. Matteo grew cold to me at dinners again, a performance so good it frightened me a little. And we let Celeste and Julian believe their evidence was ripening in the dark, waiting for the moment they would choose to spring it. The Marchetti representative named in my supposed emails turned out to be a semi-retired negotiator who had once done a great favor for Matteo's father. He came to dinner, ate everything in the house, and agreed to help. "Tell them I'm negotiating," he said cheerfully. "Tell them the wife is difficult and expensive. At my age, what else is there to do for fun? Before I tell you how it ended, I want to hear from you. After everything I had discovered, do you think I should have stayed and fought beside Matteo, or walked away and started over? Comment your choice, because when the family council finally came, I still hadn't entirely decided myself. The council came in March, in the long room at the Varenza house that still had his grandfather's maps on the walls. Celeste called it herself, which told us the trap was ready. She sat at the head of the table in gray silk, laid out my emails, my wire record, my secret phone, and asked the family, in a voice trembling with performed sorrow, whether Matteo's wife had been selling them to the Marchetti Alliance. She was magnificent. I have to give her that. "I have loved this family for 40 years, she said. "It breaks my heart to bring this to you, but loyalty to blood must come before loyalty to marriage." Around the table, the old cousins nodded. Julian sat very still, his eyes on Matteo, hungry. Matteo let her finish. He let the silence afterwards stretch until it was uncomfortable, and then he stood, and he asked one question. "Aunt, the 200,000 euros, which bank did it move through?" Celeste blinked. "The Banca Privata Luganese. It's in the record." Matteo nodded. "The Banca Privata Luganese ceased to exist 4 years ago. A real wire would have bounced. This one was typed by someone working from an old template." He laid down the file trail, the Sereno invoices, the notary in Naples, 11 million euros in consulting fees. And then he said, "But I didn't bring you here for accounting." And he opened the door, and Victor Hale walked in. Nobody in that room said his name. Nobody had to. You could hear Celeste's teacup settle into its saucer. One small porcelain sound in a room gone completely silent. Celeste recovered first. "Documents can be explained, Matteo." The phone was in her studio. That was when I stood up. "May I?" I asked the table. I laid 3 printed emails beside the schedule her office had sent Matteo the previous spring. "My husband's family employs a talented forger," I said. "But he has a tell. No Roman writes Via Appia Nuovo. The street is feminine. Via Appia Nuova. The error is here, and here, in a document only one office in this family produced." Victor told them everything, how Celeste had summoned him in October, and told him the separation was decided, that Matteo wanted cause to be rid of me, that a public scene would be rewarded and silence would be punished, that his debts, the real ones, the dangerous ones, would be cleared by morning, how she had told him exactly what I would be wearing, and where I would be standing, How he had worked up his nerve for an hour before he crossed that ballroom. "Why come forward now?" an old cousin asked him. Victor looked at the floor. "Because the man I was afraid of turned out to be the wrong man," he said. Mateo had offered him a choice that wasn't really a choice. Testify, or be introduced to the people his debts actually belonged to. Victor chose to live. Celeste did not beg. I almost respected her for it. She sat in her gray silk and looked at Mateo with something that, in another woman, might have been pride. "Everything I did for this family," she said. "Your grandfather built something that survived wars. And you are going to hand it to a wife, a woman who asks questions. A wife you listen to is a vote I do not control, Mateo. I raised you. I was not going to watch you be managed. You weren't protecting the family," Mateo said quietly. "You were protecting your seat at its head. And Julian wasn't helping you out of loyalty. He was billing the ports while you kept me isolated enough not to look down." Julian started to speak, and Mateo turned to him. And whatever was in my husband's face, Julian sat back down and did not finish his sentence. Then Mateo said the thing I will remember longer than the slap, longer than the doorway, longer than any of it. "I spent 2 years believing evidence against the one person who never once gave me real cause," he said. "My biggest mistake wasn't trusting the wrong people. It was failing to trust my own wife. That ends today, in front of all of you, so there can be no new version of it later." What happened next happened quietly, the way real power moves. Julian was stripped of the ports by unanimous vote. The last I heard, he was in Buenos Aires, learning what his name was worth without Mateo behind it. Celeste was retired to the estate in Sicily with her title, her pension, and a telephone that no longer rang. The family called it mercy. It wasn't. It was arithmetic. Victor Hale left the city within the month. His company was absorbed, his debts restructured by people who now answered to Mateo, and his testimony bought him the one thing he wanted most, to be forgotten. As for me, I testified too, in my way. The financial police received a very thorough provenance report on 11 million euros. Some forgeries you restore, some you hand to the authorities. The day before she left for Sicily, Celeste asked to see me alone. I went. She was smaller than I remembered. "You think you won," she said. "Marriage to a man like him is a longer war than the one we just fought." I looked at her and felt, to my own surprise, something like pity. "You fought for a seat, Zia," I said. "I'm not fighting for a seat. That's the difference between us. It's why you were always going to lose." A week later, our lawyers came to the house with the separation papers. The same cream folder, 60 pages, ready for signatures. It had all been arranged months before, and nobody had thought to cancel the appointment. I remember watching that folder come through the door and thinking how strange it was, that a marriage could be ended by a meeting nobody remembered to cancel. Mateo took his copy, read the first page, and tore the whole thing in half, then in half again. Then he looked at me, and I saw him stop himself from saying what he wanted to say, and choose, deliberately, to say the harder thing instead. "That's my answer," he said. "It isn't yours. If you still want to leave, Arya, I'll let you go. No fight, no lawyers, no leverage. You walked into this marriage free, and you'll walk out of it free, if that's what you choose." I want to be honest with you about that moment, because it's the moment the whole story turns on. I didn't stay because he tore up papers. Grand gestures are cheap. I'd watched my mother fall for 100 of them. I stayed because of 6 weeks of breakfasts where he told me the truth when the truth was boring, and because when the world handed him a reason to doubt me again, he had brought it to me instead of believing it. "I'm not staying because I'm afraid of leaving," I told him. "I'm staying because I finally know who I'm married to. And for the record, I am keeping the studio, and the name Laurent stays on its door." He smiled then, the real one, the one that had started everything above the sea 2 years before. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said, "about all of it." He meant it, and he proved it the way things are actually proved. On paper, in daylight. At the next board meeting, I was seated at the table as director of the Varenza Foundation, with oversight of the port audits. My provenance firm took the family as a client, at full rate, invoiced monthly. Mateo insisted on the invoices. "Never work for this family for free," he said. "They stop respecting what they don't pay for." People ask what changed, day to day. Small things. He called from the car, every time, because a missed message had cost us 2 years. I stopped auditing his silences for insults. We argued, properly, out loud, the way people do when they're no longer afraid the argument is the ending. The quarter inch of air between us closed. I hadn't noticed how cold it had kept me until it was gone. 6 months after the slap, we went back to the same hotel ballroom for the spring gala, same chandeliers, same orchestra, probably half the same guests. I stood beside him this time, from the first dance to the last, because I chose to, and everyone in that room knew the difference. Near midnight, he looked toward the great windows, to the corner where Victor Hale had once put his hand on my face. The orchestra was playing the same waltz. I had checked. It mattered to me. "Do you ever wish you hadn't come that night?" he asked. I thought about the bruise, and the recording, and the 2 years of silence, and the strange, slow daylight of everything after. "No," I said, and took his hand. That was the night we finally stopped believing everyone except each other. The marriage that was supposed to end at that ball became the marriage we finally chose. And if you were me, would you have stayed after learning the whole truth? Tell me your answer in the comments, and subscribe for more Mafia romance stories where one single moment changes everything. Because sometimes the person standing in the doorway isn't your ending. Sometimes, if you both do the work, they're your beginning.